I'm in many groups and I've been part of many discussions about the Hyksos. And what I found really fascinating in your articles on the female Illuminati is that the Hyksos, as part of their exile, they fled to Britain. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, that's right. That's another one. Well, they came from the West, is my belief. No matter how long they were in Egypt, and scholars have identified that they were in Egypt, not at the time of Akhenaten, over a century before. They date to the 13th dynasty and the 14th, to a pharaoh called Ahmosis. Ahmosis. He got rid of them. He was one of the bravest pharaohs in Egypt who finally got sick of their set worship and their exploitation and their criminality. But the story of the Hyksos, or the Hyksos, the shepherd kings, as they were called, is so fascinating because I believe, and this is where I might differ from a little bit from Ralph Ellis and other thinkers on the subject, is I believe that they originally were from the West, and that their return, and this is all based in Scottish and Irish annals, ancient scriptures from Ireland and and Scotland, and it's all in my work explained in the Irish origins of civilization. And of course, there's a Persian connection, but even more than the Persian connection is a group called the Scythians. I just call them Scythians because nobody really knows how the word was pronounced. And what we know is Amazonians were connected to the Scythians. They were a female branch. Remember I said the gynocracies always can be discovered when you're looking? Well, what we call Amazons were actually bow-wielding, sword-wielding females, but the larger group to which they belonged was called the Scythians. And these were horseback riding warriors, but they were also sages. They're a very unusual group. You should look them up. And so my work deals a lot with them because they're the connection, one of the connections from the Middle East, like Anatolia, Middle East, right? They're connected in with Phoenicians, and they're a very, very important group. And if you leave Scythia out of the picture of all of the things that we've been talking about, you'll never have the key. Greeks are very important because Greeks themselves were influenced by Scythians. Remember, Pythagoras was instructed, the Pythagoras before the Pythagoras was a guy called Abaris, who was a great warrior of the Scythians, who came and really is the patron of the school of Pythagoras, exactly what I say. But that's not just one incident. The cultures of Rome and the cultures of the pre-Greeks is really a Scythian, Persian one. And that story has been left out of all of the narrative. And this was the mythmongers did this. And so they worship the horned ones. They worship the goddess of the night, Venus. They were all Venus worshippers. They worship the horse. When you dig up their graves, you find out a lot. Their kind of worship. And it was basically Celtic, pre-Celtic, Gaelic, Nordic, Gothic. They were Indo-Europeans, but they were the ones who brought a lot of wisdom after the destabilization of the great cataclysms. The Scythians are very, very important. And as they descended, they came into Egypt. And I believe that Hyksos were the Scythians. So hopefully that opens up a few doors. And Akhenaten ties in because I believe that his bloodline was Scythian, as well as Hyksos, because they're one and the same. And one of the proofs of this is he had 6 daughters, 4 died in a famine, and the 2 that remained, one of them is the most evil woman who ever lived in the history of the world. Her name is Meritaten, but the daughter of Akhenaten, and she's the one who came to Ireland. Her grave is either her grave or her daughter's grave is down in County Kerry in Ireland, as the myth goes. Now, her nickname was Scota. So when you hear the word Scotland, how many people know that Scotland is named after an Egyptian priestess and princess? Not just any princess, but the daughter of Akhenaten himself. So my book explores all of this. Now, one other thing that you get into when you study this word, this nickname, is that she was called that because one of the meanings of the term Scot or Scot, it means dark one. I don't think it has anything to do with complexion. Dark one means dark one, introverted, quiet, silent, fucking evil. All right. She was into the dark arts. She was the one that was the true queen of evil. And so her story is carefully told. So when you hear about the second wave of Israelite Exodus, the one that the Exodus is really focusing on, as I said, Ahamos had thrown them out before, but the Exodus in the Bible is really about a secondary expulsion during the time of Akhenaten. Nobody knows what happened to him. He was murdered or he was killed, or his corpse was taken out of Egypt. But the leader in my work, in my book, the leader of the Atnists after the fall of Akhenaten himself was his daughter. And so this has to be borne in mind. Now, the symbols that this is the case are actually very obvious when you know what you're looking at. And in the Female Illuminati program, this is a 6-hour program that we did, is on Unslaved. And in that, I explain all of this, that the leader of the Exodus, the leader of the Israelites, the leader of the Hyksos into the West was actually a woman. And she was married to a Scythian king, Mile. He has many names, but the one in Ireland that he's known as is Mile, M-I-L-E. And he is the king of the Gaels. So when we use the word Gaelic, and you can use it widely and connotatively, but the word Gaelic actually means the race of Meritaten the princess and her Scythian king Mile. When they get to Britain, UK, they breed, and that race is the Gaelic race. So it's quite late. It's not quite right to say Irish. Well, the later Irish are Gaels, but there was a pre-group, but we won't get into all of that. And so the dark one, Meritaten, is buried in Ireland. Go figure. Her name is Scotland. But guess what? Scotland is the second name. Ireland was called Scota long before Scotland got the name. And it's only when later Irish moved to Scotland that they brought their princess's name with them and gave it to Scotland. Or on old maps, even of the Roman times, Ireland is known as Scotia. So don't tell me there's no Egyptian Western connection. It's been in front of everybody. The ancient annals mention it, but again, the mythmongers lead you off in other directions. It leads you towards British Israelitism and all of these other things, to try and get you to not read these books and not know anything about it. Now, one thing must be pointed out. Not all the Hyksos make any trek over to the West. The group that we're talking about is the aristocracy, the elite, whose ancestors had come from the West in the first place. See, when Mile and Meritaten get this Scythia, they stay there for a while. They also stayed in Spain. There's a lot of actual physical evidence in Spain that they were there. But when they got to Scythia, their ancient homeland, they were rejected because the Scythians knew who they were. They were, oh, yeah, I hope you're not coming back to vie for kingship over us again because we've got our own king and we don't want you. Well, that's exactly what happened. Mile, in his arrogance, thought, oh, I'm coming back, make way. So they were pushed out. He couldn't get a foothold back in his homeland of Scythia. So they went to Spain instead. And then from Spain, you could see Ireland. And so the Great Crossing, it is all mentioned in the ancient annals. The Milesians crossed over to Ireland to take Ireland, another ancestral homeland, bringing with them their Egyptian, aspects. But the mass of the Hyksos, Israelites, Scythians, they're the Israelites that you hear about in the Bible who stayed and conquered Judea and who were later taken into captivity. They are Hyksos. They are Israelites. But they didn't go west because they're just the rank and file. They don't matter. The ones who get to the blessed lands, the ones who make that trek, are royal. And the waves part for them. Whatever country they went to, there's even rumors that they ended up in Greece. They passed through Greece. They're the Danites. Their king is called Danaeus. Right? But you can get into the etymology of all of that, and it shows an Egyptian connection. And that these then people end up merging with the Franks, who are not French, but German, a German tribe. And then that German tribe moves into France and becomes the Merovingians. But there's a Benjamite connection. On the female Illuminati side, I explain all of these connections. The Benjamites have a connection to this. The Danites connect to this, and the Merovingians connect to this. The great king of the Merovingians was called the Hook-Nose. Yeah? William de Galon and his fathers were the Hook-Nose, the sort of Middle Eastern physiognomy, and had a Jewish star on their flag, and on it goes. These movements into the West. So it's not just Meal and Meritaten. There are other derivative movements, but the mythmongers wanted to talk to you about Levites and Danites and Benjaminites. That's the story. That's the cover on the front, but you have to decode it to find out how these Eastern groups moved into not just England and Ireland, like I said. That's a very fascinating one, but also moved into France as the Merovingians. And the Merovingians then are the ones who ultimately, after a certain time, moved to Holland and converted to Protestantism. And the Protestantism, the Protestant Merovingians under the name of the House of Hanover move over and become today's British kings, the red hairs. That's the connection. The British crown comes from Holland, and they fool you by pretending to be on the surface Protestant, but they are connected to the Mary line of France, which was Merovingian, and House of Orange when they were Catholic. And then that Merovingian line, you trace it all the way back to the Middle East. So it's just one big bloodline. So there's your connection to the modern, like you asked the question, these modern aristocrats are actually biologically, as great Lawrence Gardner, I recommend his works, Bloodlines of the Holy Grail. Don't forget that man's extraordinary work. And he will show you this in pieces. They all have parts. Ralph Ellis's book on Mary Magdalene, you must get that book. He goes into it because he updates the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Those are good books, but they require updating. And Ralph Ellis has updated the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which came out in the early 80s. Fantastic work to try and show about the Prior of Zion and all of that. These are essential works. And they're not to be, don't listen to the critics who try to tell you there's no such thing as the Priory of Zion and it's all just made up nonsense. It's not. So, these books I recommend. And if you go to the Female Illuminati website, I've sort of abbreviated the real story and shown you how this black nobility, as they're called, they are the Satanists from ancient times, how they are still biologically and ideologically connected, and also showing you that they're behind modern socialism. What we know as political socialism has occult roots. And these are the roots that must be exposed. So when you talk about number 10 Downing Street, that's just one anecdote. You have the same lion's heads on the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. The symbolism gives it away. The colors, red, white, and blue, So go through those 6 articles. An amazing story unfolds.
Michael Tsarion, as always, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.